The death and dying business, a billion-dollar industry. It's what they call evergreen business, meaning that it's always needed and it'll never not be a thing. The state of the world we live in now, especially these last few years, the death and dying business has become even more of a moneymaker. So much so that there are some facilities that have started doing some really shady business practices on the back end to either cut costs or make more money or even pleasure. This came across my desk from an old friend who is actually in the business. She's a strong advocate for green burial, a burial practice where you're treated and cremated with natural things like water. That's the one thing that you don't think of when you think of dying, if you think of that sort of thing often. When you're embalmed, they fill your body with so much bullshit. The chemicals that are used when you're embalmed are formaldehyde, methanol, sodium borate, sodium nitrate, glycerin, and coloring agents, and water, all of which destroy the ground and the drinking water.
Cannot be made non-poisonous. So this is what we put inside caskets, inside vaults, into the ground.
So as you can imagine, she receives her fair share of hate from the psychos who want to destroy the environment, etc. Since she's been in the business a super long time, she's also seen some things. Body preservation is a huge thing, as you can imagine. Your nan dies, you want her body preserved. You want it done right so the family can see her properly. It seems pretty common for mortuary directors to be negligent with bodies. Many, many times, bodies are sent to the mortuary and not refrigerated within 24 hours. Usually if that happens, the body at that point will go into a deep stage of decomposition. Michael Aldrich was the owner of Aldrich Funeral Homes. He's accused of improper preservation of a body after not placing the deceased in a fridge after getting the body itself. According to the lawyer of the director, he claims that Mr. Aldrich didn't place the body into refrigeration because the family declined to pay for the cremation, a cremation that Mr. Aldrich was charging 4 times the market value of. So let's do a little breakdown of finances of a funeral. Even with the most basic of services, you're still about to pay $3,000. And also, why do I need to pay you $600 to transport a body? Give me a box, I'll bring them to you myself for that price. It's a joke, of course. Megan Hess, a funeral director based out of Colorado, her and her mother offered to cremate family members of clients for a steal of a price, $1,000 or less, which, as you just saw, is pretty much unheard of. Only, as you can imagine, Megan and her mother were not the gracious saints that they portrayed to be with offering affordable cremation and funeral services. Her and her mother operated the Sunset Mesa Funeral Home. They were arrested in 2020 and charged with 6 counts of mail fraud and 3 counts of illegal transportation of hazardous materials. These bitches, on dozens of occasions, transferred bodies or body parts to third parties for research without the family's knowledge. According to the Justice Department, the transfers were done through Sunset Mesa Funeral Home. The families were given ashes that were not those of their loved ones, authorities said. The 2 ladies also shipped body parts that tested positive for or belonged to people who had died from infectious diseases like HIV or hepatitis B and C, despite certifying to buyers that these remains were disease-free. The lawyer for Megan says that she was driven by the desire to advance medical research. But it doesn't stop there. Oh, no, it doesn't, because they not only are greedy, but they're also nasty. It's not a secret that there are people in this world who fuck a corpse. While diving into this hellhole, I realized that the act of necrophilia is a lot more common and out there in the open than I thought. Kenneth Douglas worked night shifts in the Hamilton County morgue from 1976 to 1992 as a morgue assistant. That's a long ass time, and in all of those years, he had sexually abused over 100 corpses, one of which was a victim of murder and was in the morgue with almost a severed head. Another, a 6-month pregnant strangle victim. If technology hadn't developed in the sense of DNA analysis, he may have never been caught. Semen was found in one of his victims, Karen Range, the woman who was partially decapitated. It remained a mystery for almost 30 years until the owner of the semen was found. She was 19 at the time of her death. His semen was only linked to another victim. However, in his deposition, he confessed that he would smoke crack and get really drunk, then proceed to have intercourse with the deceased. He had done this while the bodies were awaiting autopsy, so they were intact. The most damning testimony against Douglas in court was from his wife. Douglas's wife claims that she had called the morgue supervisor, complaining that her husband was coming home from his job smelling of sex and alcohol.
Called Bernie Kersker in 87.
Yep.
And tell me, as best you can recall, exactly what you told him.
I told Bernie, I said, Bernie, I think that Kenny's having some problems. And he said, what do you mean, Pat? And I said, Kenny's coming home, straight from work, and he's smelling like booze. And he said, what do you mean smelling like booze? I said, he smells like he's been drinking. He said, well, maybe he's stopping off. I said, Bernie, I called him at work, and he came straight home. It took him 15 minutes. I called the morgue. It took him 15 minutes to get home, and he smelled like booze. Unless he had something in the car, then he was drinking there, and he was too intoxicated to get drunk that fast. And Bernie said, you know what, Pat, I'll look into it.
How long had it been going on by the time you called Mr.
By the time I called Bernie, it had been well over a year. But it wasn't happening every week. It wasn't happening every month. It was periodically.
Did you tell Mr. Kersker on the second time you called him about the drinking?
Yes.
What
yes.
did you say?
I told him, I said, he's still drinking. You told me you would talk to him, and you haven't. I said, because I've asked Kenny, and Kenny said to stay out of his business. So I'm calling you, and I'm telling you, the drinking hasn't stopped. I said, but the thing that has really gotten me bothered right now, and I said, is he's coming home smelling like sex.
So that's what you told Mr. Kersker?
Yeah.
That Mr. Douglas was coming home smelling like sex?
Yes.
And what did Mr. Kersker say?
He said, why do you think he's coming home smelling like sex? And I told him, I said, we're down to one car. More often than not, I'm dropping Kenny off and I'm picking him up. And I'm taking him home. He gets undressed and he reeks of pussy. I'm sorry. Excuse me. And that's the way I said it. And Bertie said, Pat, whatever happens on county property and county time is county business. You're an insecure, jealous wife, and I don't want you to call here anymore. And he hung up on me.
Currently, Douglas is being tried for the sexual abuse of 3 corpses, of which his DNA has been linked to. 23-year-old Charlene Appling, who died in 1991 after being strangled during her 6th month of pregnancy. 24-year-old April Hicks, who fell from a 3rd-story window in 91 and died from blunt force trauma. And Range, who was nearly decapitated by a door-to-door salesman in 1982. Douglas admitted to having sex with these corpses and many more while they were kept in storage awaiting autopsies. This man had intercourse with a woman who fell from a 3rd-story building. I don't know if you have seen a lot of those videos, but I don't understand how that could have happened. She had to have been literally folded up. How awful.
Signed her in and bagged her hand and all of that, and I believe she was dressed like that If I'm not for sure if she was in a body pouch or was she wrapped up in a blanket. I really can't say, but I do remember going in the freezer, pulling in one of the rooms in the back.
Okay. And what happened?
I had sex with her.
Did you ever have to unzip body bags to see the women?
A few of them.
Okay, some of them?
A few of them.
Okay.
I think Karen was one of them,
Okay.
the first one.
Right.
And I remember talking to you about Karen Range, where you said that you pulled her out, you got up on the gurney and had sex with her. Would this be the mode you used to get up on the gurney, and
That only happened a couple of times.
where you would
The
actually
other times,
Parse yourself
I
out.
can't actually remember, but I do remember sometimes I wouldn't. I would just
masturbate?
masturbate, right?
Well, but
And I would have my hands on her.
What's that?
I probably had misused. Yeah.
Do you think you may have with her?
Yes.
And why do you think that?
The big booze.
Okay.
you like
Is that
I
something?
like booze, yeah. When I got drunk, I like big booze.
I mean, you, I guess, just pulled yourself up on the gurney. Would you have to, how would you do that? I'm just curious. I mean, because they're on the gurney. I mean, would you have to kneel in front of them or open their legs up or?
I would just get on top of them, pull my pants down. But I said a lot of times, I wouldn't climb up on top of the body. I would just put my hands on them and masturbate. A lot of times. That was quite a few times. I can't put a number on it,
But
but
it was a high number.
there was a high number, right?
Karen Grisly was just 23 years old. On December 17th, 1979, she was driving the body of Mr. John McCure to the cemetery to be buried. When she was driving up, John's family stated that she made a huge U-turn and drove away, with John in the back. She wasn't seen until the next day. She, of course, went missing and had her way with him, and then proceeded to take 20 to 40 Tylenol codeine tablets, leaving a 4-page suicide note in the coffin of Mr. McCure. I couldn't find the letter with much success, so if anybody is able to find that, let me know, because I bet that shit's wild. In the letter, she confesses to having up to 40 lovers who were deceased. However, at the time in California, necrophilia wasn't illegal, so she only received 11 days in jail and like $250 or something in fines. After her arrest and all of that, she provided a super detailed interview of her thoughts on necrophilia and herself as a necrophiliac to Jim Morton for a book called Apocalypse Culture. In this interview, she says things that are just... We'll go over that. It's important to mention that by the time she had done this interview, it had already been 5 years since the drive-off with the hearse incident. Part of her punishment was mandatory therapy, which she says helped her accept who she was. When asked about how she received very little support, especially in the media, which is not surprising, she mentions that her brothers had a hard time with it. One is no longer speaking to her, and the other is somewhat distant, but still curious. She says she's often asked how she does it. She mentions that she would come across people who would just ask her the question, and she told them the answer, and they would just stop contacting her. While she does speak on it kind of coyly or whatever, she does say that it's not really a penetration thing. It's more of a rubbing up on them thing, stimulating herself. Quoted as saying, "Yes, this is the question people ask me all the time. Even people who seem pretty cool, seem to have open minds. When you tell them, they say, that's very interesting, and then they don't want to have much to do with you after that. I don't mind telling people how I do it. It doesn't matter to me, but anyone adept sexually shouldn't have to ask. People have this misconception that there has to be penetration for sexual gratification, which is bull. The most sensitive part of a woman is the front area anyway, and that's what needs to be stimulated. Besides, there are different aspects of sexual experience, touchy-feely, 69, even holding hands. The body is just lying there, but it has what it takes to make me happy. The cold, the aura, the smell of death, the funeral surroundings, it all contributes." She also says that the smell of death will sexually arouse her, but it's very specific in what she means by that, saying, "Sure, I find the odor of death very erotic. There are death odors and there are death odors. Now, you get the body that's been floating in a bay for 2 weeks, or a burn victim. That doesn't attract me much. But a freshly embalmed corpse is something else. There's also attraction to blood. When you're on top of a body, it tends to purge blood out of its mouth while you're making passionate love. You have to be there, I guess. But she went a step further. She would often attend the funerals of her deceased lovers, visiting and mourning with the family. She's quoted as saying, "Yeah, it was convenient working in the funeral homes. I get to drive out to the cemetery with the family. I get to mourn right along with the family at a loss of a loved one." Except I was groaning in a little different tone. People couldn't really tell if you're grief-stricken or passion-stricken. I've had members of families put their arms around me and say, "We're so glad you could come." Then you have to spin some big old yarn like, "Yeah, I knew him in school." If the guy didn't have a girlfriend in life, they would think, "Oh, she's the one." She had been actively caught in the act once, battling extreme depression. She decided that she was going to kill herself. She went to a mausoleum close by her house, and she tried to do it there. However, the door to the mausoleum was connected directly to the mortuary. Sad and alone, contemplating the best way to kill herself, she decided that she would try to run her driver's license in the door of the mortuary. And it worked. She's quoted as saying, "I couldn't believe it, so I tried it again and the door popped open again. I went into the prep room and there happened to be a body in there. Had me some fun, did my thing and forgot all about killing myself. I had told the folks at the halfway house I was staying at that I had stayed with friends. I went in there several times. Sometimes there were absolutely no bodies, so I turned around and snuck back out. I usually went in the back door." She continued to sneak in and out of the morgue, and a week later, while she was in the middle of a session, she heard people walk in. 2 people. She tried to hide, but was unsuccessful and was seen. She knew the layout of the office, so she was able to run and escape, but they had seen her already. The police were called. However, nothing came of it. She says that that's more than likely because the publicity that the funeral home would have had, it wouldn't have been the best. At the time, I still had a friend who worked at the funeral home, she said. She mentioned that he had told her somebody broke into the funeral home and they know that it was her. They had put an alarm in and they had called the police. After the interview, Karen went off grid, changed her name and is no longer able to be found. And she hasn't been heard from since. I'm telling you, this whole video has changed my perception on morgues and the people that work in them. Of course, not all morgues are this way, and not all people who work in morgues are awful. My friend Melissa, who goes by the Modern Mortician, is absolutely lovely, and she's a fighter for green burials. I recommend her Instagram page as well. It has a lot of info and whistleblowers of the horrendous conditions in some of these places. Before I head out, I do have to thank my most favorite people, Dojin, Dazzling Dice, and Richie the Wolf. Y'all keep this ball rolling, and I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. If you want to help support this channel, consider becoming a member. Every cent goes back into the channel so I can deliver you quality stuff. With that being said, I'm Crystal, this is Getting Spooky, and I'm out.